Welcome into another edition of New Track Record Podcast. Caleb Hatch, Justin Kinney with you from the WELT studios, the Allen County Public Library here in downtown Fort Wayne. And boy, what a week it has been. Pretty quiet in IndyCar land. And then yesterday we have a huge story drop and potentially more news that could drop as we record this here on Wednesday morning, July 3rd here in the U.S. First off, hi, Justin.
Hello, Caleb. How are you?
Doing well. I did get that cold that we teased about last week.
Yeah, sounds like you're on the other side of it, though, so that's good.
Basically better, just more of a nuisance thing. But
nothing worse than being, well, anytime you're sick, it sucks, but in the summer.
Yeah, so it's like weird because you want to do fun stuff, and you're just like sitting on the couch.
Right. Just like being sick, cold, flu, it just goes with the winter months. You know, you're inside anyway. You can't really do anything, but man.
It's not like there's a lot of sports on TV. There's no IndyCar race for me to watch over the weekend. Yes, there was actually somewhat entertaining F1 race, but a lot going on in IndyCar land.
You mean you didn't watch all 5 attempts at green white checker at the Nashville Superspeedway?
No, I did not.
Me neither.
Which we'll get some interesting tidbits on Nashville later on in this episode as IndyCar set the race there for the season finale in mid-September. But man, we will get to our mid-season grades for full-time IndyCar teams, but obviously the story of this episode, the story of the past several days leading into Mid-Ohio this weekend, is a massive change yet again at Arrow McLaren as Alexander Rossi will not return to the team after this season. He's completing the season, no mid-season drama. He's out. Christian Lundgaard moves in from Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. He will drive the number 7 Velo entry, which is the key wording here because Hy-Vee not mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which was the talk that they were going to go to.
That was a rumor that was out there. So we'll see what happens with Hy-Vee, if they stay with Rahal, if they go over with McLaren, if they're out entirely. I mean, considering they're back at Iowa next year, I would assume Hy-Vee's back in a team sponsor role as well.
I would hope so. If they're not, it would start concerning me that could that be the first step of Hy-Vee's complete exit from IndyCar, considering how big they are a part of NASCAR's Iowa weekend.
Yeah, which was a success. Shocker.
After some dicey moments early in the weekend, it ended up proving to be a really successful event.
So we have McLaren, and let's kind of do a reset first before we get into the move itself, because I think you have to go back to the timetable. So the team that started out is branded as McLaren in 2020. You had Pato O'Ward and Oliver Askew. Obviously, Pato's been a mainstay in the 5 car ever since. But in the 6 car, you've had Oliver Askew. You've had Felix Rosenqvist for a handful of seasons. You were supposed to have Alex Palou. Going into last season?
2023. Mm-hmm.
Then, or no, it would have been this season.
This season, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's easy to get it mixed up just because that's played out over the past 2 years now. That was almost 2 years ago. So you have that. And then obviously no Palou. Felix Rosenqvist hung out for, I think, another year longer than people expected. Then no Palou. Then you have David Malukas, he gets the wrist injury. And then you have Callum Ilott. Then you have Teo Porcher. He gets booted. Then you have Nolan Siegel. Oh, and then you've had Alexander Rossi in this same entry, the 7 car, last season and all of this season. So a season and a half of results where things are at. And no wins, no poles, 2 podiums. That's essentially the level of success that we've seen in this car. And when you look at this team, when you go from thinking you're going to have a 3-car lineup of Pato O'Ward, Alexander Rossi, and Alex Palou to what they're going to have next year with Pato O'Ward, Christian Lundgaard, and Nolan Siegel. I mean, Nolan Siegel wasn't even on the IndyCar radar essentially a year ago in terms of being a guy a lot of people were thinking about, let alone thinking about for a top ride. Yes, he was mentioned with Dale Coyne Racing as potentially going there as some sort of HMD partnership, but that was about it in terms of IndyCar interest. So a lot has changed just at McLaren in terms of drivers. And then we get into the actual results and reality of this move. First off, for McLaren, I get it. You get a race winner, a guy who's won a race more recently than Alexander Rossi, when Lundgaard won at Toronto last year. He is overperforming for a mid-pack team at Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. He's not been as solid this year maybe as he was last year,
right?
But there's still a lot of tracks that he can be successful at coming up on the schedule. So that move in and of itself, to me, makes sense. You swap out a guy who's 32 for a guy who's, 22 years old, who's seen as one of the kind of the next guys in terms of drivers in the series. Very talented. He has pace. He can contend in terms of qualifying and for race wins. I mean, that's the starting point, and we'll get more on Rossi, but I think hiring Lundgaard, look, this is clearly a better option for him in terms of money, competing for wins, poles, competing for the championship, better results at Indy. That's not something he's really done much of yet in his career. So this move makes complete sense for him.
He has shown over the last year and a half that he is the top driver at Rahal Letterman Lanigan, winning at Toronto last year, finishing 8th in points and 11th in points this year, podium at the road course at Indianapolis. He has shown the potential that in a better car with a better team, he can take a step forward. The win last year at Toronto was refreshing because it was out of the big four of the teams that are winning, and it was also refreshing for Rahal Letterman Lanigan. You and I have agreed for the last couple of years that Lundgaard is that top driver at RLL. He gets the opportunity now to take a step up with a bigger, more highly funded team and see if he can continue his ascent in IndyCar. And as you mentioned, the fact that he's just 22 years old, will turn 23 later this month, is all the better for IndyCar or for McLaren, because they're looking to get better and potentially younger, and they do it both, in my opinion, with Christian Lundgaard.
I agree there, and also just the fact that they're betting on the future in terms of Pato O'Ward, who's 25, Lundgaard, who's 22, Siegel is still 19, right? They're betting on the future by going with the younger driver lineup that they hope, if they can keep these guys around, maybe not next season, with the exception of Pato, who you expect to be finishing around the top 5 in points every year and winning multiple races, capable of doing that. But the other two, this is a long-term play in terms of solidifying their lineup for the future. But I don't think a year ago, 6 months ago, this ever would have been part of their plan.
Well, it seems like their plan, quote unquote, changes almost weekly at McLaren. But I look at this situation as being, and the expectations are similar to Felix Rosenqvist. Now, he got 3 full seasons at McLaren, not counting him missing 2 races because of that injury he suffered at Detroit. Don't forget, Kevin Magnussen in that one race at Road America in 2021, another driver that's been in that 7 car in recent years. But Felix Rosenqvist finished 8th in 2022 in points. That was his first full season without missing any races. And then the next season finished 12th. And then he was done last year, going to Meyer Shank. So I see a similar expectation for Christian Lundgaard. Year 1, we want you to finish in the top 10 in points, back into the top 10. But year 2, we want you up where Pato is consistently in terms of competing for race wins. I think that's the expectation, but we know how notoriously impatient McLaren can be. Is the expectation for them that Christian Lundgaard, already a proven race winner, comes in and starts winning races beginning in 2025, I think that'd be a stretch, but it wouldn't surprise me if Arrow McLaren is thinking that for Lundgaard next year.
Well, and he won, in terms of Felix, he won, 4 poles with McLaren? So the car is capable in terms of running up front. Now, we're talking about different entries here, in terms of Felix, but I would say in the hierarchy of the team, right, we would say that Lundgaard would be number 2 and Siegel would be 3. Obviously, Pato's the number 1 driver. And that shifts to another point for me that, I was just doing some reading and, what are people thinking about the move? And I forget where I saw this. It was on the Reddit page or wherever else, Track Forum. If I get really bored, sometimes I peruse these sites and just see what people are saying.
At least as long as you're not reading the comments on Racer Stories.
No, I try to refrain from that. Maybe once a month I trick myself and do it, and then I immediately regret it. But something a commenter pointed out I thought was a really good point in all of this, and it's that is McLaren treating their IndyCar program like their F1 program. And here's what they meant by this, and the way I interpreted it, and the way I think this pans out. So Pato O'Ward is noted for having a very rough driving style, right? Not smooth, not like an Alex Palou type of style. Townsend Bell calls him the surgeon. Pato O'Ward's the exact opposite of that. A lot of slipping and sliding, that kind of thing. So I think Rossi made some comment, I don't know if it was on off track or what, but talking about, he doesn't like driving Pato's car. Now, that could have been a comment in regards to he just did a shakedown, at a test for Pato's car or something like that, or for someone else before they got in at a test. It could have been as simple as that. Or could it be that McLaren says, okay, Pato's our number one guy, and we're going to use his setups, and that's going to go across the board?
Yeah, potentially. We know that Alexander Rossi has had various struggles since the adoption of the aero screen. But really good drivers adjust to the conditions of the car. That's not an excuse for me. I'm not saying that Alexander Rossi is using it. I think maybe some people, defenders of Alex Rossi, will use it. That, it's just he's just never been able to find his grooves since the adoption of the aero screen. That's on him more than anything, in my opinion. You just have to adjust your driving style. But I agree, and I also think when you're comparing Formula One and IndyCar teams in terms of McLaren, is you're seeing the resurgence of McLaren in Formula One, particularly this season. I mean, Lando Norris is the right now biggest threat consistently to Max Verstappen.
In terms of pace, yes. In terms of will he actually be able to overcome Max? I don't think so. I just don't think he has the experience and is going to make the right moves.
Right.
I think McLaren as a team could maybe go on a tear. I mean, if they keep racking up double podiums and win the Constructors, I think the Drivers' Championship is out of question.
Yeah, for sure. But McLaren, for the first time in a long time, is probably the second best team right now in Formula One.
And best in terms of raw pace.
Correct. And Lando Norris being at least right now, the most consistent threat to steal wins from Max Verstappen. We saw him finish. He won Miami, has finished second, like 3 of the last 5 races after that Miami win. And then, of course, battling Max last weekend at the Red Bull Ring. And whether you're Team Max or Team Lando, you can debate on who was to blame with the crash. But my point is, in regards to IndyCar, has the resurgence of McLaren on the F1 side created more urgency for McLaren on the IndyCar side to say, we're rising our level in Formula One. That needs to be reflected as well in IndyCar.
Excellent point. I mean, it's not just Zach Brown, it's not just Gavin Ward, it's not just Tony Kanaan. I mean, this is a massive business enterprise with shareholders from all over the world, right? I mean, they're owned by one of the like Middle Eastern countries, right? Like a sovereign wealth fund,
I don't know, it's like a Saudi thing, or
So there are other people above those 3 names I mentioned in terms of making decisions. So do they feel a sense of pressure and urgency to make quick moves now, as opposed to, let's see what happens? Because I mean, let's be honest. There's a possibility the hybrid comes into play, and Rossi's had good form this year, right? He hasn't won a race, but he's had good form this season. He's definitely adjusted to the team. It seems like he found a good fit there at Arrow McLaren. But does he suddenly have more success with the hybrid being introduced and just kind of a slight tweak to the formula? Does that change things for him? I mean, it's a legitimate question. He's been pretty good. 3 out of the last 4 races, he's finished in the top 5.
He has. The Bahrain Mumtalakat Holding Company is the largest shareholder of the McLaren Group. There you go. So it was somebody over there.
Yeah,
exactly. Some country over there.
So we shift more to Rossi and what is his future now? I mean, I think the obvious thing you think of is, well, does he go to Prima with a guy who's either stuck in F2 or in F1, like a Logan Sargent, who was rumored? I mean, look, I think we'll all be maybe more surprised if Logan Sargent isn't in IndyCar in 2025. He's going to bring a lot of funding. He brings name recognition, and I know people are going to say, well, he didn't do anything in F1. Well, the same could be said for Alexander Rossi. Granted, he had, 5 Grands Prix. Same could be said for Marcus Ericsson. Can't quite say the same for Grosjean because he did have some podiums
right
in the Lotus days. But, I mean...
Takuma Sato?
Yeah, Takuma Sato, who did have some limited success, but for the most part was driving for mid-pack or worse teams. It's not a barometer when you look at F1 success or lack thereof and moving to IndyCar and what that means. But either way, I think the pairing that I think of immediately is Rossi goes to Prima and is joined by Logan Sargent with that team. Now, I think that's a huge risk if that's what he does, but I think it's also clear in these negotiations, look, this was not like some nasty divorce between Rossi and McLaren.
And technically, he's not being fired. His contract ends at the end of the season.
Yeah, he's a free agent. They didn't come up with a new contract that they could agree to terms. And the way I interpreted all of this was that Rossi asked for more money. I think I read somewhere that he wanted, a multi-year contract, and McLaren was only offering one. I mean, this is negotiation. This is business. It sounds like it was a business decision by both parties. They decided we're going to step away. We can't agree to terms. And I think it's clear that Rossi's probably going to make more money in his next contract. I don't think you walk away or have more stability, and I'm talking like a 3-year deal, something like that, like a 2 plus a driver option or a team option, a lot better than just a 1-year deal.
Going back to, because I know there's a lot of supporters or defenders of Alexander Rossi to say he's getting a raw deal. I again compare him to Felix Rosenqvist, who was in the 7 car, got moved to the 6 last year for Rossi to take that 7. But in the 2 full years that Felix Rosenqvist drove for McLaren, not counting 2021 when he missed a couple races, he finished 8th in points and 12th in points. And that wasn't good enough for McLaren. And he was not retained for 2024. Alexander Rossi finished 9th last year and his 7th this year. Again, that's not good enough for McLaren. And that's why I don't blame them for saying, we'll give you a 1-year deal for 2025 because you need to prove that you can win races. And Rossi said, no, I'm looking for a multi-year deal, which is ballsy for him considering he's won 1 race since 2019. To think you can command that kind of money. But Rossi now has effectively lost his spot at Andretti. He's lost his spot at McLaren. He's not going to Ganassi. He's not going to Penske. He's going to go to a midfield team at best. And maybe he gets that multi-year deal from Prima or Rahal or something. But it's going to be at a considerable drop in ability and performance of the car and of the team. And that's his decision. But, he had 2 prime opportunities at 2 of the top 4 teams in the series and failed to perform. I think he's gotten more than enough time to prove that he can be a consistent race winner in this era of IndyCar of the last 4 or 5 years, and he hasn't been able to. And that's why he's going to be a free agent heading into 2025 as of right now.
He's a fan favorite, and he had 2 championship-level seasons in 2018 and 2019. But since then, across 2 different teams, he's won 1 race. And after winning 8, and 5 of those 8, right?
7.
7 of those 8, and would have been 6 out of the 8, right?
Let's see.
Because he won in the Indy 500 his first year in 16. He won at Watkins Glen in 17.
It'd be 7 of his 8 came 2019 or before.
Yeah.
Because he won 3 races in 2018 when he finished a runner-up in the championship.
So he had those 2 championship-level seasons, and he was building, right? We could see in 2017 that he was building up to that. But then changing the car? I don't know, because it can't be as simple as the aero screen to me.
No, it can't be.
I think another factor that people discount, IndyCar continues to get more and more competitive. The cars are more maxed out in terms of the engineering, right? There's not a lot left to tweak, and the best teams and the best resources are Penske and Ganassi. He's just simply not with those teams. Those teams always rise to the top in spec eras, and that's what IndyCar has been for the last decade plus.
Well, I mean, this is the harsh reality. People love, and drivers love, and the series love to talk about that the series has never been more competitive than it is now. And it's a great point by you, because I think in 2018, 2019, when he was second and third in the points and won 5 races between those 2 years, the series, or the paddock, just wasn't as deep as it is in 2024. I think Alexander Rossi is a product of the deeper talent that is now in IndyCar, and him just being beat out by more of those guys. And also, I think that's reality. I mean, he went second and third in points to 9th, 10th, 9th, 9th, 7th. It's just, as other drivers have come into the series, better drivers, as people rise, some people have to fall. And the one of the drivers that has fallen is Alexander Rossi.
Also, another factor is this may help him and be in his favor, but 2018 and 2019, what was different then? Well, they just introduced essentially a new aero kit. And those are the first 2 years of that. And then you go to the aero screen.
Andretti had it figured out from the jump in 2018.
Yeah. So I think the ultimate question before we move on to our team grades, where does he end up? I mean, I think a lot of us think Prima. Bobby Rahal had an interesting quote in a Bruce Martin article talking about they're talking to current F1 driver in terms of so I would assume that's
Max
a Logan
Verstappen.
No. I would assume that's a Logan Sargent as being a possibility.
It's like the only one that comes to mind.
Unless unless like Magnussen steps away or something, which I don't think that's happening.
See happening, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think it makes sense for Rahal. I think they need to find somebody that's in the prime of their career, that is a proven driver in the prime to be that number one driver at Rahal. They may not approach it that way because they still think Graham is the top guy, and considering Graham is heavily involved in the business operations, I don't blame him. But who do they grab and to then be their primary guy at Rahal? I just if you're looking long term, I don't think Rossi's that guy. I think it makes perfect sense if Prima wants to get a veteran coupled with a rookie or a young driver, especially if you land a Logan Sargent and he brings that financing, because Prima's going to need it, because they're not guaranteed. They're not going to be in the leader circle. They're not guaranteed spots depending on how the charter system works out. So they need financing on the back end. And so having Logan Sargent on board with, say, Alexander Rossi seems like it makes the most sense for Prima. But as we know, in auto racing and IndyCar, what makes the most sense rarely ends up happening.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And, you know, like, to me, Rahal actually would be a good fit because he could be, you know, a number one driver there. He's good on ovals. That team has struggled on ovals.
True. But,
I mean, Prima seems like the obvious first choice based on his past associations with the team.
But
we know Yuri Vips will get a seat at Rahal. Yeah. Do they keep Pietro Fittipaldi? Who knows? I mean, he's got to have a better second half of the season. But there are a lot of questions. Does Andretti come back out with a fourth entry if they find funding? Does Ganassi punt one of their young drivers and put Rossi in a seat? Who knows?
I mean, that would be best case scenario for Alexander Rossi. And I think that's the question that we need to ask is, while Prima makes the most sense, does Alexander Rossi value his potential and skill enough to say, I'm not going to a brand new team. I want to go to an established IndyCar team. And to that vein, maybe end up at a Rahal or maybe even like an Ed Carpenter Racing or something like that. It's a step back, considerable step back, but maybe not as big of a step back as going to Prima, because while it's a very established team overseas, it's stepping into a completely new scenario next year. I don't want to directly compare them to Carlin, but there's a lot of similarities between Carlin and Prima coming in next year. So does Alexander Rossi want to go to a team that has recently won a race in Rahal, or a team that has never even qualified for a race in Prima? And Does money dictate what that decision is going to be? Does length of contract determine what that's going to be? So many questions, but I think maybe the question we're not asking is, what does Alexander Rossi want to do?
He sounded pretty confident that he had something pretty much lined up in his quotes in the press releases. He's
Which is good.
Basically saying, I'll have, announcements soon on my future, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this news this week didn't come out of nowhere. This isn't Theo Pourchaire finding out that he's out of a ride. I'm sure this has been in the works, or McLaren has let Alexander Rossi know well in advance that this was going to go down, allowing him to start contacting teams.
Yeah. Meanwhile, our midseason IndyCar team grades, we'll rifle through these. We'll just go in alphabetical order to make it simple. AJ Foyt Racing. It's been a good season for them. Stingray Robb he led laps of the 500, top half the field. Santino Ferrucci, another top 10. But what's more impressive is what? He has 5 top 10s, I believe, on the season and is 12th in points. I mean, they've been outstanding. In terms of letter grade, I'm going to go A-, only because
really?
they weren't as competitive at Indy, I think, as some of us expected.
Wow, that's very high, actually. I got to admit, as a B, just because the second car, the 41, is so bad. I mean, Stingray Robb is last.
But that car is, I guess that's the expectation.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be if you're AJ Foyt Racing. The hope would be is as one car ascends, the second one can. I'm not saying both of them in the top 12 of the standings, but you would hope one of them is, in the top 12, the other one is, low teens, 19, 18, 19, 20, something like that. It's very difficult for me to just completely ignore the 41 because of how bad it has been. And I mean, the best finish this year for Stingray Robb was 17th at Road America, or 16th, at Indianapolis, and he's 23rd in points. But if this can hold out and Santino Ferrucci can finish in the top 12 in points, it'll be the first time since 2010 with Vito Armira that this team has finished that high in the points. Mira finished 12th that season. I'll go B for Foyt.
All right, next on the list in alphabetical order, Andretti Global. Colton Herta's had pace. Kyle Kirkwood has strung together top 5s. Marcus Ericsson's season post-Indy has been improved, but before that was an outright disaster. I'm going to go a C-.
Now, we are grading on a curve. We just want to make sure everybody understands.
Yeah, every team is graded individually.
Yeah, like
not
based on
in context of other teams.
Correct.
In context of their own team.
If anybody's like, how are they graded lower?
Here's why I say C-, because Colton Herta had like 4 races in a row that he probably either could have or should have won. You have the mistake that his pit crew made, not giving him enough fuel for qualifying for the Indy GP. He rallied back, still got a 6th. At the time, we're thinking, I'm saying it's a championship level drive because it was at the time. He was the points leader right before that race. But then you have Indy where he made a mistake, crashed out. You have Detroit where he probably should have been on pole. Or no, he was on pole there, but he made a mistake, crashed. You have Road America where just bad luck.
Right.
And then you even have Laguna Seca where he probably should have been on pole there. And they couldn't get the fuel numbers right. And I get it, Palou had a better car, but I mean, Herta looked like the dominant car, Road America and Laguna Seca, and no wins to show for it. He was disappointed. I think that was disappointing for the team. He's a guy you look at so far this season, feels like he left probably 2 wins on the table. Kyle Kirkwood's been really consistent. I think this is a good step up for him. And then Marcus Ericsson, it was bad luck. It was mistakes, everything. He's righted the ship somewhat, but there's a long hill to climb to get back to where he should be.
The last place finish at Indy, which wasn't his fault, really hurts Marcus Ericsson for sure. His first 5 races, not including thermal, he had 1/5 and then no finish above 16th. He's been better the last 3 races 2nd, 9th, and 10th. No wins looms large for Andretti, and that's why you can't rank them too high. But I'm also looking at a team that has two drivers in the top 5 in points. And Andretti has not had 2 guys finish in the top 5 in points since 2018 with Alexander Rossi and Ryan Hunter-Reay. Last year, their best finish in points was 10th with Colton Herta. So you're seeing progress. However, last year they had 2 wins with Kyle Kirkwood, and they have 0 as of right now. We feel that either Herta or Kirkwood or maybe both get a win in the second half of the season. But I'm going to go B- with Andretti because I think overall as a team, they're better than last year, particularly at the top end. But this is a team that is supposed to be winning races, and they're not as this year, and that's why you can't rate them too high.
That's why I gave them a lower grade than you. Is just simply they haven't won any races. They've had at least one car, if not multiple, that are capable of winning races. The driver lineup is improved. They've moved down to 3 cars. Like, expectations were higher going into the season, and I would say at the halfway point, they have not met those expectations. Next on the list, in terms of teams, this will be a fun one. Arrow McLaren. So, Pato O'Ward does have a race win. Their first win since one of the Iowa doubleheader races in 2022. You've obviously had Callum Ilott, Teo Pourchaire, and Nolan Siegel all actually compete in races. You throw in David Malukas, who didn't compete in a race for the 6 car, and then Rossi, who's been consistent, did get his second podium with McLaren first of the season, the other race at Laguna Seca. So you've seen some good growth, but you've just seen a lack of stability. Now, on one hand, they have 2 of the 3 cars in the top 10 in points. That's meeting expectations. They do have a race win, which is better than what you could say last year. They were super competitive at Indy. They had 2 cars capable of winning, and the Kyle Larson experiment was a smashing success. So those are all things boosting, but then you just have all the turmoil. I don't know how to grade this because it's just all over the map. I'm going to go with a B- because they do have the race win. They're competitive in the championship, but all the instability and all of the non-on-track stuff seems to be getting in the way of what they're actually doing. And you just want to feel like there's stability now through at least the rest of the season, and obviously going into the next year with their new driver lineup coming in 2025. It's just really hard to grade.
I'm going to go a C+, and you and I went back and forth, and I had one angle that was really harsh on McLaren, but they have a win. Andretti can't say that. How they got it, you can debate that, but the fact of the matter is they won with Pato O'Ward at St. Pete to start the season. As you mentioned, 2 drivers in the top 7 in points. But perception with this team, A, they have higher expectations than just backing into 1 win so far this season. 2, the perception of this team, both around the paddock and in the series in terms of its fans, is not in a good place. You could say it's in the worst place it's been since McLaren got back into IndyCar in 2020?
Yeah.
So perception is sometimes everything, and the perception for McLaren right now isn't good in IndyCar. You mentioned the Kyle Larson thing. That was an absolute success, but the issues from David Malukas to Theo Pourchaire to all this stuff, to Callum Ilott, of course, it's just been a cluster, and that's why I can't rate them any higher than a C because of the perception of this team. We love it. It gives us a lot to talk about. I mentioned it yesterday on Twitter, like what would we talk about if McLaren wasn't an IndyCar? But just the goals of this team are not being met, and the perception of this team continues to be at a low level.
Yeah, I think we actually went higher on our grades than we thought we would.
I think so, too.
I certainly did.
Well, I think when you look at it, you can't. However they got the win, the fact of the matter is they won.
Yes.
And the Kyle Larson thing was a positive.
And 2 cars are performing at the level you'd expect.
Right.
So you can't discount that. Next, Dale Coyne. Oh, wait. No, I skipped one. Chip Ganassi Racing. Obviously a 5-car lineup. You saw Linus Lundqvist get his first pole. Alex Palou and Scott Dixon, of course, competing for a championship. Water's wet. Marcus Armstrong's had good and bad moments. Kiffin Simpson, we thought he would be a struggle. That's been far from the case. He's 20th in points. He's been solid. In fact, 12th in his debut. So, yeah, he's gotten crashed out the last couple races. But, I mean, all things said, this is where you'd expect them to be. I guess the one thing you could say is, well, they didn't win the Indy 500. So I'm going to go A- just because they don't have that to boost their grade.
This is another team that's just so difficult to grade because their standouts are super, super high.
Yes.
And then everybody else is just down there. Linus Lundgaard, you kind of give a pass because he's a rookie. Kiffin Simpson, same thing. Marcus Armstrong is kind of that guy that where's his future going to go? Is he going to develop into a proven second guy to Alex Palou at this team after Scott Dixon retires, which would not surprise me if it's after this year, if it's after next year, at least from full-time driving. Is Marcus Ericsson that guy? And I don't know. And does he have to prove himself over the second half of the season to keep that seat in the 11 car? We haven't heard much out of it, but if he finishes, he's right now 15th in points. I mean, after 2 years, is that going to be enough with one podium? Let's say he finishes with only one podium, the one at Detroit this year. Is that enough to get a year 3 at Ganassi? So I think there's a lot of questions with Ganassi. Do they go into next season with 5? Do they get rid of Marcus Armstrong and just go with 4 with the 2 rookies being kept? Is there a scenario where Alexander Rossi ends up there? Who knows? But I think I give it a B+ because while the top of the team is exceptional, there is a precipitous drop between Palou, Dixon, and everybody else at this team for varying reasons.
And you would expect Armstrong to be a little bit higher up. What is he, 15th?
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year, they had 3 guys in the top 6 in points that finished. Palou, Dixon, Ericsson was 6th. The year before, 3rd, 5th, and 6th. They had 3 guys. The year before, 1st, 4th, and 6th. This team for the last several years has had 3 dudes that were primary guys. And maybe we didn't give Marcus Ericsson enough credit for finishing 6th in 3 consecutive seasons in points with Chip Ganassi, because right now they don't have that 3rd guy like they did with Marcus Ericsson. And that's why it's difficult for me to give them an A, because the last 3 years they've had 3 dudes, and this year they clearly only have 2.
Now we move on next in our list of full-time teams. Dale Coyne Racing. This one's simple. It's been a hard season. I unfortunately just have to give them an F. I don't know what else to say.
So there's no positives whatsoever when you look at Coyne.
The only positive is they're giving drivers opportunities, like young drivers and people who haven't competed in IndyCar or had good opportunities. But like Nolan Siegel obviously got his first shot. Luca Giotto,
Colin Braun.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only positive. But in terms of what's happening on track, there's nothing to say.
The only positive for me was Catherine Legg making the 500, yes, starting, finishing 29th, blah, blah, blah. But
then Nolan Siegel missed it in their other engine.
True. They don't have a single driver that started every race. You know, with Jack Harvey splitting with Siegel. You never know who's going to show up for this week. I mean, what is it? Is it Giotto and Harvey this week? I don't even know.
No, it's not Giotto. It is Toby Sowery.
Oh, that's right. Harvey. Yeah, we'll add a 7th driver that's been in a Dale Coyne Racing seat. It's. I know people want to look. Oh, you know, Dale Coyne's, he gives opportunities to drivers that otherwise wouldn't. That's fine and all, but this is a different series than what it used to be in terms of, oh, you know, just a good-natured guy given rides. I mean, it's just, are you trying to, like, and we've said this before, particularly me, like, what's the goal here for Dale Coyne? Do you just want to have a revolving door and take money and just put drivers out there and never finish in the top 10, which you don't have a top 10, you don't even have a top 12 finish this year? Is that the goal? What's Dale Coyne's 3-year plan, 5-year plan with this? Because this can't be it, right? So no. People can say, oh, it's nice, Dale Coyne's giving these opportunities for these drivers. It's not Dale Coyne's plan to put Tristan Vautier in for one race, or Colin Braun in for one race, or Toby Sowery in for one race. That's not Dale Coyne's goal for this thing. But I don't know how he gets back to even the last couple years where you had 2 full-time drivers in Malukas and Sato, Malukas and Stingray Robb. Hopefully it's just a year hiccup, but I don't know, man. It's tough. I will give him a D- just because of the Catherine leg thing. But as you mentioned, Siegel missing the race. But no, other than that, there's not been a lot of positives here.
Ed Carpenter Racing, unfortunately, kind of the same scenario here. I will give them a D only because Christian Rasmussen had a really good Indy 500, and Rinus VeeKay, after the crash in qualifying, still put it in the Fast 12. Also had a good 500, finishing the top 10. Those are the lone bright spots for this team this season.
And I think you look at where's the future at for this team? Is Rinus VeeKay coming back? Could Christian Rasmussen take the next step? I mean, I always kind of look at rookie seasons as kind of, okay, whatever. It's a learning experience. But could Christian Rasmussen be a guy that was what Christian Lundgaard has been or was at Rahal in terms of a guy that can develop? I don't know. It's another team that just seems to be spinning its wheels. I mean, last year, you look at Rinus VeeKay and just 2 years of finishing 12th in points in 21 and 22, slips to 14th last year. Now he's 17th in points. This was a guy that last 2 off seasons or a couple years ago was looked at as getting an opportunity potentially with the top team. Now he has 2 top 10s, hasn't finished above 9th all season long. And that interest is largely dried up. So you talk about Coyne lacking direction. Where are we at with Ed Carpenter Racing here? What's the long-term plan for Ed and this team? I'd love to know.
Did you give a grade? Did you go?
I will go D.
Okay. Next on the list, Juncos Hollinger Racing. Obviously coming off their best ever result as a team, 4th at Laguna Seca with Grosjean. You have all the off-track stuff with Canapino. Again, another one where it's hard to rate because you obviously at least deduct a full letter grade for all of the off-track stuff. But on track, it's been promising. I mean, Grosjean's 14th in points. That's top half of the field. He has 3 top 10s. One of those is a top 5 finish. If he can repeat that in the second half of the season, I think they'd be thrilled. Meanwhile, it feels like Canapino's taken a step back. He still doesn't have a top 10 finish. Thermal doesn't count. 12th is still
his
best.
next year.
So this is one where it again feels like it's hard to grade. I'm going to go C+ just because we've seen some progress in terms of what Grosjean's done lately.
That was the exact same letter grade I had in my mind as I was trying to come up with one as you were talking. The uncertain thing for me for Juncos heading into the second half of the season is the fact that it's not like Romain Grosjean has done exceptional consistently at ovals, in which there's a lot of ovals coming up. A couple of years ago, he did well with Andretti, but it's a significant step back racing ovals with Andretti as opposed to Juncos, and did an admirable job at Indy, 19th. But the same reason why I had a hard time ranking McLaren any higher due to perception is where I'm at with Juncos. Yeah, you're having more success on track, at least with one of your drivers, but the other driver has been a headache and his fan base has been a headache. Agustin Canapino showed some signs last year, particularly the first couple races, as being a guy that really, we talked so much about him being a veteran and knowing when to push into, last year, 21st in points. Okay, you take that as a rookie, but we haven't seen that next step in year 2 for Canapino.
It feels neutral, right?
It does. It's like, is this the best you're going to get out of Canapino? Last year you thought, okay, this is the baseline. He only improves from here. He hasn't. He's 21st in points right now. It's the same exact place where he finished last year. He's battling for a leader circle spot. You expected more, especially when you have a teammate that's exceeding in terms of expectations. Juncos it's kind of that thing with Foyt. Okay, well, if one driver can do it, why can't both of them do it? It's a damning indictment on Stingray Robb, and I think it's a damning indictment on Agustin Canapino.
So you're saying C+, though.
C+, yes.
Next on the list, Meyer Shank Racing. Another one that's tricky just because of a driver change. Obviously, Felix Rosenqvist has had outstanding pace, got the team's first pole, doesn't have good race pace, though, and that's been a concern. He is, 10th in points? He's competitive, but you feel like you're almost... You should be getting more out of it because he's had good results, but it doesn't seem like he's able to maintain his qualifying pace in races. And then you have the second entry, Blomqvist replaced. TBA with David Malukas, it's kind of hard to really grade where that's at. A rookie driver, so it's not like you have a lot of unfair expectations to begin with. And then you come in with Malukas coming off an injury. We'll really start to know after the Iowa doubleheader if we think he's going to return there next year or if that's not going to work. Hard for me to grade. I see this more positive because I think this team is taking a massive step forward compared to where they were
at least with
the
one
previous
driver,
2 seasons. I'm going to go B+.
Yeah, I'm in the B range. I'll probably give him a straight B because while he has had pace, and you could look at Felix Rosenqvist as a disappointing season thus far based on where he has started as opposed to finishing, outside of Indy, which was a mechanical, right?
Engine failure, yep.
He has finished no worse than 14th. I mean, with a decent finish in Indy, he's well in the top 10 in points. And this is a team that had Elio as 18th in points last year as their only guy to be in the top 25 in points. Now, granted, they were playing revolving door after Simon got hurt at Mid-Ohio, but the fact remains. I mean, even in 2022 with Elio and Simon Pagenaud, they were no better than 15th in points. So if Felix Rosenqvist can finish in the top 10 in points, it's a considerable step forward for this team. Who's that second driver? Tom Blomqvist didn't work out. Whatever went down, and it seemed more like Blomqvist just wasn't comfortable in the seat, and maybe it was a confidence thing after the early Indy crash. Who knows? The key for Meyer-Shank the second half of the season is finding out, is David Malukas the guy going forward to be that second dude with Felix in 2025, or do they need to bring somebody else in? I'm giving them a B based on Felix's performance, but some uncertainty behind that because they don't really have a proven second driver.
Next on the list, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. You've had Graham Rahal, who just really has struggled. Just 2 top 10s this season. Christian Lundgaard has a podium, but it seems like he's had competitive cars and good qualifying performances, and whether it's contact or something seems to get in the way. Pietro Fittipaldi's yet to have a top 10 this season in his entry. I think there's potential, and could they have a better second half of the season? Definitely. But where they're at right now, I'm going to have to go C-.
Yeah, it's...
Plus, the Indy qualifying was a struggle again.
Yeah, it was eventful, to say the least, with qualifying. They did bounce back during the race with Rahal and Lundgaard and Sato all finishing in the top 15. I think back-to-back-to-back is where they were, 13th through 15th, led by Lundgaard. It's another team that I'm like, what direction are we going here? You're losing Lundgaard, who is your only proven driver that can not just win races, but challenge for podiums. He's the only guy. Rahal hasn't been higher than 9th all season. He's a non-factor right now. Never finished high. I mean, he had a podium last year at the second road course race.
A race he should have won.
Yeah, which, not taking advantage of the opportunities he had. But where does this team go? Pietro Fittipaldi, he's not the guy. Whether you keep running him into 2025, it is what it is. He's not the guy.
We know Yuri Vips will probably be in one of those seats.
You would hope that he gets some multiple races down the stretch.
This year.
A 4th car or something, this year, to maybe tease him. I mean, that's what we saw late last year. We thought he would have a better presence this year, but I think Pietro Fittipaldi brought some financing that maybe pushed Vips to the side for 2024. When is this team going to raise the level of itself, and can it, under the current driver lineup? Quite frankly, how much is Graham Rahal holding this team back on track? Maybe he's not at all, but I think it's a conversation to be had, definitely. So I give it a C, okay. I guess. It's not a disaster like some other teams, but you're like, eh.
Next on the list and last on the list, Team Penske High highs, winning the Indy 500 as Joseph Newgarden goes back-to-back. Low lows, the push to Penske, the push to pass gate, and everything with the push to pass button and getting caught after using it at St. Pete.
I vaguely remember that.
Newgarden and McLaughlin obviously disqualified. Will Power docked 10 points, which could be crucial in the championship. We'll probably revisit that later on this season. And, of course, the suspension of some team officials during the month of May. Again, high, low. That said, you have only one driver actually competing for the championship because of those disqualifications. Yes, all three drivers have won a race. They've had speed, but man, it's really hard to grade because it's like as great as winning the Indy 500 should make it, an A+. The push to pass thing makes it an F, and you only have one true championship contender. I mean, Newgarden and McLaughlin, if they're going to get back into it, they're going to have to win a lot of races down the stretch. I know everyone's going to say, well, Newgarden has Iowa coming up and all the ovals. I get it, but it's too far of a hole to climb out of.
Especially with his finishes at Detroit and Laguna Seca.
Yeah, he's had a bad season. I mean, the Indy 500 is the bright spot. In terms of a grade, another one that's hard. C-.
Wow, that low, huh?
Yeah. I mean, because you have an incident that completely tattered the reputation of the team. You have 2 or 3 drivers who, in my opinion, are not championship contenders because of that incident and getting disqualified. Yes, you have an Indy 500 win, but you had team members suspended. Basically, a lot of people that their opinion of Joseph Newgarden has forever been changed in this series because of what happened. And Will Power, who's just been consistent, but he wasn't a threat in the Indy 500. Yes, they did sweep front row qualifying. I don't know. It's hard to grade, but based on expectations, they're not living up to them.
I'm going to go a lot higher. I'm going to go B. Anytime you win the Indianapolis 500, you start at an A+, and then you go down from there.
Well, that I agree with you.
Yeah,
but they went from an A+ to an F because of
you're going
2 drivers getting disqualified.
I would say yes. So it goes to F there, and I C, and so it averages to C. But I'll go a little bit higher because all 3 drivers have won races. It's the only team that has 3 drivers that have won races this year. The resurgence of Will Power has been a great story this year after struggling last year on track and off track with the issues with his wife Liz and health issues, and really his mind being elsewhere, rightfully so, last year. Perception is everything. We talked about that, so that's why I can't get this team a higher grade, but I'm still going B because in the end, every driver that's not racing for Penske right now, other than maybe Palou and Dixon, if they're offered tomorrow to race for Penske, they're going.
Yeah.
So perception is hurt, I guess, but it hasn't hurt the competitiveness of this team nor the desire for people to race for them. So the further removed you get from it, the less impact it has. I get it. People's thoughts and stuff about Newgarden. Yeah, people, not as many people like Newgarden now as they did a year ago now, but he doesn't seem to care now. They've had some missteps on track. Scott McLaughlin at Long Beach, at Detroit, Laguna Seca. I mean, their Detroit race weekend was just the worst we've seen Penske in a long time across its stable, and that was with Will Power still finishing 6th. So I go B, maybe B-, because there's some high highs and definitely some low lows for this team.
All right, with that, time to do a quick race preview. The hybrid era in IndyCar gets underway this weekend. It is the Honda Indy 200 at the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. Coming up, we have practice Friday, all times Eastern here for IndyCar, 3:20 to 4:35. First time you can get a look of the hybrid on track in an official session. Peacock, IndyCar Live, SiriusXM, IndyCar Radio, all the outlets for these. Then on Saturday, practice 2, 10:50 to 11:50. Qualifying 3 to 4:30 on Saturday afternoon. And then on Sunday, the warm-up 10:25 to 10:55 in the morning. And then TV coverage at 1:30 on Big NBC. till 4 o'clock. Green flag, approximately 1:45 or so for the weekend. I guess we take a look at our 3 key stats from Chad 200 for Mid-Ohio. Colton Herta started 2nd, 3rd, and 1st the last 3 races here, finished 13th, 15th, and 11th. Will Power has 1 win, 5 poles, 9 front row starts, 8 podiums, 206 laps led. And Scott Dixon, 6 wins, 8 podiums, 14 top 5s, 263 laps led at most all time. When we take a look at this, I think the ultimate question is the hybrid a game changer, or is it just another thing? That's the question. I hope it's a game changer.
Yeah.
But because of the teams that did the bulk of the hybrid testing, Penske, Ganassi, Andretti, McLaren, does that really make it a game changer?
Well,
I mean, if they have extensive experience,
is it a game changer already for Andretti to get a win? Maybe the second half of the year.
But also, how reliable are the units?
True.
They don't have them maxed out in terms of the capabilities. So
I'm going Scott Dixon. I mean, when you change anything in this series, you go with the seasoned vet. He's won there 6 times? You said.
Yes.
He's
Mr. Mid-Ohio.
I'm going with Scott Dixon. I mean, it's a boring pick, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. And you mentioned teams that are maybe better prepared, at least in the short term, for this. I'm going to go Scott Dixon to win. What about you?
Well, since you took Scott Dixon, I'm going to go a bit off the wall. I'm going to go Kyle Kirkwood.
He's been beaten on the door a couple times this year. We'll see if he can get over the hump.
So those are our picks for the race. We'll see what the hybrid does in its debut. Very fascinated to see
I am, and
how this plays out.
There's so much out there technical about how this thing works, and acronyms, 3-letter acronyms about
kilojoules
and blah blah blah. And here's how I'm breaking it down internally. Is now we're going into races where you have 2 ways to get added boost: push to pass, like you have on road and street, and now this hybrid that can. Basically, you can harvest energy and then deploy at your leisure whenever. And that will be everywhere. So you can get in the technicalities and all this stuff about how and why, and it's way over both of our heads. But basically, this is what it means. You have 2 ways to get added horsepower now with the car. And we'll see how that develops. And I also thought about this too is, man, because I tested at Iowa this past year or this past week.
I tested Milwaukee.
And that's a lot going on in the car with 17, 18 second laps at Iowa in particular, and in traffic, navigating all that and deciding when you're going to harvest energy and when to deploy energy. Will there be situations in which drivers are like, I have too much going on? I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm just saying they're going to have to adjust with some of these short ovals coming up with this technology, because there's going to be a lot to keep track of and a lot going on.
Yeah, you may just simply forget, right? Because it's a new habit.
You forget, or you're trying to figure out what you're doing with the deploying and harvesting, and you don't see a driver making a pass on the outside or inside, and it creates an incident. I mean, who knows? It's going to be an adjustment period for everybody, but I think that's maybe an overlooked thing that you didn't have to deal with on ovals until now. There was no push to pass on ovals. Now you effectively have a way to get more boost to make a pass or something like that. And it's just an added wrinkle, an added element. You can test all you want, but until you're out there, particularly on short ovals, where there's not a lot of time to think, there's not a lot of room to maneuver, and then having to deal with an added dimension like that, I think it's going to be a learning curve. Maybe not necessarily Mid-Ohio, but when we get to Iowa, when we get to when we get to Gateway, when we get to Milwaukee, I think that's going to be a storyline to watch, is when is there too much going on and maybe a driver makes a mistake that he otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, it's the reality of where we're at. If you agree or disagree with us on our takes on the McLaren move, on Rossi, on our midseason grades, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can always find us online, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. While you're there, you can sign up for the email list. It is free to subscribe. You'll get emails for new episodes, any special announcements as well. Also, you can check out the store. We have t-shirts and stickers in there for you. You can find us on social media, IndyCar Podcast on Twitter /X, also on Instagram, on Facebook. Just search for New Track Record. And you can email us, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. Support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. And download and listen to the podcast for free as always. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube Music, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Castbox, wherever you listen to your podcasts, download and listen in for free. Mailbag time, Justin, and we have quite a bit to get to, mostly related to the McLaren news. So let's just get into it. And you posted this, and you said Rossi hasn't delivered at McLaren, but then again, who has? Of course, I said, well, Pato, you could say has, but that's kind of the exception. OBX Jody said, McLaren is the Dallas Cowboys of IndyCar, not success-free, just not overly successful of late. Interesting comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to Dallas Cowboys at some point have been at the top of the mountain. McLaren has never been at the top of the mountain of IndyCar.
NK Harden says if the second McLaren car's lack of success was on Askew, Rosenqvist, Rossi, Malukas, Eilert, and Pourchaire, makes you wonder if just maybe it's been McLaren's fault this whole time. Something we did kind of dive into.
Yeah.
P56 Front said the whole team hasn't really in isolation, though. Doesn't feel like he has had the same pace as Pato. Reading the tea leaves, it would seem the team was good to keep him, but his asking rate / term didn't match where they thought his value to them is. Will anyone? And that's a question. And a side note, Rossi actually, in that Bruce Martin Forbes article, said he hadn't actually talked to Prima yet, but several teams have reached out. So,
I mean, it's a good.
Who knows?
It's a good point. You can look at Rossi's finishes this year and last year and say, yeah, he's been up there. But I can't remember the last race where I was like, Alexander Rossi has a legit chance to win this race.
I mean, Indy.
Yeah.
But then he didn't have the fuel down the stretch and went from third to fourth on the last corner of the last lap.
Right. Other than Indy, maybe even last year too. I mean, what's the last race that comes to mind for you that said, you look at Colton Herta, you're like,
Laguna Seca, he had an opportunity and seemed pretty mad at his team for. Yeah,
that was a tough ending to the season for sure, or tough ending for that race. But for me at least, I if it's Palou, Dixon, and Rossi up there, Rossi's my third choice. If it's Pato and Newgarden and Rossi, Rossi's my last choice. Just kind of where he's at right now.
You also posted this real question. How many of these era McLaren driver decisions are the work of Zach Brown? How many are Gavin Ward? Buck stops with Zach, but is Ward leading this chaotic revolving door with drivers? And a lot of great replies. T-Ness Alex said, I think TK plays a big part in these changes, hoping for some stability after this tumultuous season. I mean, TK played a massive role in the Siegel signing. P56 Front said, I agree with the macro view of the revolving door. We'll look at each individually. It all starts with Palou. They planned on Alex Palou. Malukas was plan B. Eilert a fill-in. Sauber wouldn't release Pourchaire long-term, so Siegel became long-term. No deal with Alexander Rossi, so time for Christian Lundgaard. Daguerre said, I don't think anyone can convince me that Pato, Siegel, Lundgaard is a stronger lineup than Pato, Felix, Rossi.
Now, you kind of push back because you like this lineup for 2025.
I like it for 2026.
Okay. My thing is McLaren is not patient.
Yeah, they went with a long-term play. I like 2 out of the 3 for 25. I like all 3 for 26.
It makes sense if McLaren is patient.
If this is what they've settled on, is this all just a thing where the Palou news, which was obviously shocking, and him backing out, that was not part of the plan. It took them a while. They had to move a lot of pieces around. If this is where they've settled and they stick with it and let it play out, that's fine. Whether it works or not, I mean, people's jobs are on the line, right? But at some point, you have to settle on something. If this is what they've settled on, that's fine. Be confident and go forward.
If they approach 2025 with the lineup in place, with the expectation that multiple drivers are going to win races, I think that's the wrong idea. Then this lineup isn't going to work. If it's we have one established driver, one guy that's could break through, is up and coming, and one rookie that's learning, then it makes sense. But what the expectations within McLaren and what we think they should be may not align.
If they go into next season thinking Siegel's going to be ready to compete for wins, I just don't think that's fair.
I would definitely agree. I think it's unfair to think that Christian Lundgaard's going to come in and be a championship contender in year one. Could he get a win? Maybe, but he's not finishing top 5 in points next year.
But I think inside the top 10 is a realistic goal. It's just what are their goals, and how does that stand out?
But that's the problem is you've had each of the last 3 years, Felix Rosenqvist finished in the top 10 in points in 2022, and then Rossi did it last year, and then Rossi's on his way to do it this year. That wasn't good enough. So if it's top 10 in points for Christian Lundgaard, what's the difference between him and Rossi and Rosenqvist? Unless
younger, cheaper talent.
Yes, unless they're playing the long game, which McLaren doesn't do a good job at playing the long game.
Other replies on here, FitJ1983 said, I don't have an issue with this move or Felix's. Since their contracts were ending, I think the team handled it appropriately. On the other hand, yeah, know where you're going with that. Tyler_Allen, I don't know, he came from Penske and you'd think he'd know better. That talking about Gavin Ward. DJ_Maldonado saying, didn't TK put his name on the Siegel signing? Yes, he did. And then these are interesting takes from Mike, 15 days in May. When Zach first talked about coming to IndyCar 5 years ago, he said it was something the McLaren stakeholders wanted to do. There are more people in play above them compared to a typical IndyCar team. That's the first part. Part 2, look at how things work with drivers, athletes, and coaches in European sports. They have no issue sacking someone if they don't think they're cutting it. And I think that's kind of the point, and I guess maybe that's where I got that idea from, in terms of, you know, they have other stakeholders beyond just the 3 people we're focusing on the IndyCar side.
Yeah, the question we proposed on Twitter was, so many people want to go directly to Zach Brown, going, what's Zach Brown doing with all these driver moves? I mean, who's to say it's not Gavin Ward leading that charge? Who's to say it's not the stakeholders leading that charge? So it's not directly necessarily a direct tie to Zach Brown. I think the guy that maybe needs more questions asked of him is Gavin Ward, not necessarily Zach Brown.
And then poll question, where does Alexander Rossi land for 2025? Nearly 9.5% of you said Rahal. About 4.5% said Carpenter. Nearly 66% of you said Prima. 20% said other. A few replies here. Deguera said Ganassi. Be interesting. Big D Cart said, who says Rossi will even be in IndyCar next season?
That's something that you've kind of said, and you can make a case. I mean, a guy that's won one race in the last 5 seasons, he's 32 years old. Could he be an Indy-only guy? If nothing,
I mean, he doesn't bring sponsorship to the table. So, yes, if he goes back to a Honda team, Honda may want him, but I don't know. I don't know if Honda's investing that kind of money. I mean, Honda's potentially has 1 foot out the door, so you have that to think about too. Some other replies here. Samu3 Loose said, I don't know why McLaren would get rid of him other than the fact that they're McLaren. Rockvim D said, if he doesn't see the benefit of starting a new team with Prima, I think his ego is too big to drive for the others. Great point. Tyler Wong 65 said definitely Prima. And Hunter's Way 67, hopefully to Prima with Ilott. That's another interesting combination. I mean, you have Ilott, Pourchaire, potentially Logan Sargent, all, and Rossi, all kind of mentioned.
Could Ilott be the guy that replaces Lundgaard at Rahal?
Who knows? I mean, he's got a pretty good deal with his WEC ride, so we shall see.
A lot to determine.
And then you posted, imagine how boring IndyCar would be without McLaren, though, which is true.
Yes.
Mom 2X over 2002 said, seriously, I mean, who else would give us stuff to talk about on X or podcasts? Do I feel for Alexander Rossi? And then Heil Mike said, true dat, definitely brought the drama. Look, they keep it interesting.
They do.
You can never, what's the exact saying? You can be this, you can be that, but never be boring. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And that's McLaren.
Now, as we look at these potential open seats, a couple of people mentioned Ganassi. How do you feel right now? And this will change, of course, as we learn more. But as of right now, what do you think of the chances of Ganassi running 5 next year? Do you think they're good? Do you think they're not good? Do you think they're 50-50?
I mean, I think it depends on
money.
Kevin Simpson's there as long as the funding's there. I think Linus Lundqvist has got to get better results.
Yes. I almost kind of give him a little bit of a pass because he's a true rookie. I look at Marcus Armstrong as that guy that maybe in the crosshairs a little bit more. But, I mean, Ganassi likes money. We know there's money being brought in for at least one of those rides, probably two. But you're also stretching your crews very thin. And while there's a lot of success with two of your drivers, there's a lot of mediocrity at best with the other three. Two of which are rookies, but I'm looking at Marcus Armstrong as being that guy. Like, second half of the year, you got to show something, man. You really got to show something.
And that's the thing. It's like, my other issue in all this, like, you can hope he goes to Ganassi or Andretti, but the reality is Rossi wanted money, right? And the market's changed for paying drivers, but he's not a young driver.
Correct.
And so they're not getting, like, yeah, the Dixons and Plows and are getting big money. I mean, even the Penske guys aren't getting, big money, and we don't know what they make, but
They're
I'm
not
sure
getting Colton Herta money.
No. Or Ericsson or Kirkwood or Pato Award money, right? So
now, with Joseph Newgarden's re-up, it would be interesting if some numbers out of that.
We never get anything out of Penske on that, though.
But maybe some hints that it's in the range of a Colton Herta-ish something, so we'll see.
Bauer Racing saying better chance he will be at Coyne, talking about Rossi. Again, though, unless they find an F2 driver or a current F1 driver who brings a massive check.
That's the thing. Coyne needs money, and Rossi doesn't bring any. Or very little.
Yeah, that's the issue in all of this. So a lot of people debating, a lot of people thinking, someone saying the 4 car, that from Tyler_Allen. I don't see it because you're not kicking out Kevin Simpson. Ray Hall, maybe, but I'd be surprised. There are just a lot of questions with what happens.
Very much so. Silly season takes no breaks.
No, not anymore. Not anymore. It used to be, it would kick off at Mid-Ohio, right? That's so far from what it used to be. That's the part that's so crazy.
Yeah, now we're in the thick of it.
In terms of just the change in the drivers and the actual announcement itself, and this is a good question. How can any driver feel safe at McLaren?
I don't think you can. But I think one thing that we know that we can definitely say positive is McLaren has brought the F1 seat mentality into IndyCar. Look at Formula One. You're never comfortable outside of the top 3 or 4 drivers. Nobody's comfortable in Formula One. And McLaren has taken that and brought it over to IndyCar for better or for worse. But that's how they run and that's how they roll. And we've seen it in Formula One time and again. Like, nobody is safe in your seat unless you're bringing a lot of money, as we've seen in IndyCar.
Money always talks.
It does, and lack of money talks as well.
That's also true. That is the mailbag for this week. Time to move to news and notes, and one note for Mid-Ohio, and that is the fact that Marcus Armstrong will be back in the Root Insurance car. So orange and black, that'll be a striking thing, and a story that literally just came down on Racer.com. Yuri Vips. They're looking to move him up, obviously, at Ray Hall. So I'm trying to skim this as we actually record everything.
He's going to get the 2025 seat.
Is that the official thing?
That's what it looks like.
Ray Hall doesn't expect to have the new driver, the number 45 Hy-Vee Honda, locked in until August. That from Racer. Also spoke to suggestions that Hy-Vee was leaving along with Lundgaard. They're still working on stuff with sponsors, so not really going to know what the driver situation is till the end of July, more likely end of August.
Is It sounds like if the money can be secured, Yuri Vips will be in that seat full time.
And it sounds like Hy-Vee will be back.
Yes, which is good news.
So it's not official, but that's what they're working to do, which is, again, not a surprise. Other notes on Alexander Rossi. I think there was another note with him because we just continue. I said 0 conversations with Prima. He's also never driven for Prima in the past. That from Jenna Fryer.
Good to know.
But again, if Prima's going to pay a lot of money, and Rossi wants the money, I guess that's where I see this
and the
going.
Multi-year contract potentially,
which they would definitely need for stability. That's where you go. Other notes to get to: the Sauber F1 team plans to keep Teo Pourchaire on the IndyCar grid, not with Andretti Global. That per motorsport.com.
Okay.
So we'll see.
And that's kind of
there.
What we understand is kind of the issue. One of the issues with McLaren and Pourchaire was his Sauber duties, and as long as that's a thing, it may prevent him from being a full-time driver in IndyCar with another team.
TV ratings. So we finally got a number: 183,000 for IndyCar at Laguna Seca on CNBC. That includes streaming and TV. We knew it would be bad.
I felt it was higher than I expected it to be.
I don't even know what I expected. The good news is Marshall Pruitt saying for the racetrack itself, earlier summer date a success. Ticket sales up 9% over 2023. 40,000 in attendance. Campgrounds over 350 campsites reserved. So that's the key part to me.
I think it's huge because there's outside of Long Beach, it's been a struggle to get fans to West Coast races, particularly California races. You look at California Speedway, you look at Sonoma, and to a certain extent as well, Laguna Seca at times. So the fact that tickets were up, 40,000 is a solid number.
Now, is that for the weekend or is that for race day?
They said 40,000 for the race. So
okay,
it's impossible. It's much more difficult even than a street race with all the viewing mounts and all that stuff, to figure it out. But for a series that has struggled to find any type of toehold outside of Long Beach on the West Coast, and I throw Portland into that as well, I think it's good if you can develop or continue to develop Laguna Seca into a successful event.
Other notes, and we'll talk more about this. So there's a really good interview of Mark Miles, blackbookmotorsport.com. Never heard of the site. This is an excellent interview. And Mark Miles talked about a lot of stuff. Of course, going to Fox, international races, international series, all these things in this article. But the key thing, you get to the very end of the article, right? It's always this way. And the key comments that he said on this story, which I believe we did tweet out. So in terms of where things are at, the key things he said, and we're going to hold him to this. So I'm just going to read verbatim a couple of paragraphs. We've announced, and the question here is, how much potential does IndyCar have for future growth? What needs to happen for the series to take that next step? We've announced, this is Mark Miles, we've announced a uniquely powerful media rights deal for the next few years that almost constitutes a relaunch. We're going to have our charter deal done with the teams for sure this season. We're introducing the new hybrid. We are quite far along looking at the car of the future, which will have more to say about this season, and it will have an effect as early as 2027. We are this season going to announce an exciting new U.S. market to be added to the championship, and hopefully we can add a second, but that's not as close. We have at least 4 sponsor additions or extensions that will be announced this year that are important. I'm leaving things out, but before the end of this season, all those things I mentioned will be public and factual, which gives us momentum. He went on to talk about, potential void in the marketing and then the crossover promotion with Fox having Daytona 500 in the Super Bowl. But those are the key things from the entire article, those 3 paragraphs.
When we look at
new car potentially by 2027. 1, possibly 2 new events for 2026. At least that's the way we assume, because we know it's not for 25.
Correct, and new sponsors.
4 sponsor additions or extensions that are key.
So in knowing that, and something else in that article that needed to be pointed out is they consider IndyCar a North American series.
Yes.
So if you take that into consideration, you can cancel out South America, at least in the respect that he's talking.
Which they did have someone there, last week to look at a track in Buenos Aires?
Correct, which, I kind of drown those out now. How many times have we had somebody looking at tracks in South America? Here's my thing, is we know that IndyCar, at least the Mark Miles and company, have talked about new events wanting to be primarily street races. We know, we don't really know, at least Denver was on the radar. Could San Antonio be on the radar? Those are the two United States events or locales. The dark horse is Mexico. That's the one that I would really be over the moon for. So if we're talking about at least one event to be announced for 2026 this year, my guess is it's either probably Denver, maybe San Antonio.
Those are the two I have in mind.
I would love it to be Mexico.
As would I. I just don't feel like they're far down the road. I think the two possible, I really do, are San Antonio is more of the lock and Denver is more of the we might get there.
Yeah.
But he said for the intents and purposes of saying a North American-based series, that includes Canada and Mexico.
Correct.
So that's a key thing to keep in mind. Obviously, it would be great if IndyCar not only improved, and I think the Fox TV deal hopefully will help. I know Canadian viewers have been screwed over time and time again by TSN and TSN Plus. Hopefully the move to Fox is helpful. I know international rights are separate and all that, but hopefully this helps. Also, having a second Canadian race would be big.
Huge. I think those of the quote potential new races, I put Mexico 1 and Canada 2 over the two U.S. races, potentially.
I would as well, unless that U.S. race is on the East Coast, which they desperately need a footprint in.
Yeah. I mean, are you looking at New York just seems too crazy.
Yeah.
You tried Boston. Washington, D.C. would just be next to impossible. I mean, that would be more impossible than Chicago.
You tried Baltimore.
I mean, there's no way that would happen. That would be awesome, but there's no way. I mean, diplomatically, you can't have roads closed for a race with the business of politics and diplomats visiting, all that stuff. Anyway.
Doesn't seem, I mean, Watkins Glen.
Philly?
Not interested. Pocono, I think, is interested, but IndyCar is not.
I mean,
Philly, I don't know.
Philly would be maybe.
Would you count Pittsburgh as East Coast? I wouldn't.
I wouldn't, but I'd entertain it for sure. So who knows? But I think there's a lot to throw out there. Of the most smoke that we understand in terms of United States events would be Denver.
I would say San Antonio.
Well, I think we've heard more. The only thing that we heard for San Antonio was the guy writing the editorial for the newspaper. I think there's been more discussion, at least, and Marshall Pruitt has kind of teased it with Denver than San Antonio. We have no confirmation that IndyCar has even done any type of meeting or anything with San Antonio.
See, I view it the other way around. I feel like San Antonio is way more likely. It's essentially Pato O'Ward grew up there.
I mean, I agree
huge
that
for
would
sponsors
be better.
in terms of NTT. They have a big presence in Texas with NTT data, so that to me seems better. It sucks that IndyCar can have a race in San Antonio and they could have a race at Texas Motor Speedway,
or our great idea of along the border.
Yeah,
with going back and forth. But
don't think that'll happen.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, they never listen. People never listen, but I think there's interesting markets that could potentially be part of what Mark Miles is talking about. But then again, it's Mark Miles. We take everything that he says with a grain of salt until announced. And even then, I mean, until we're racing there, you never know.
Couple of sports car notes that impact IndyCar teams. To no one's surprise, Meyershank Racing will be back. Multi-year agreement. They will run a pair of Acuras and IMSA next season, starting with the Rolex 24 at Daytona. You would assume that Elio Castroneves would have an opportunity to be a third driver. You also would assume that Colin Brown and Tom Blomqvist will be some of the drivers for those entries. Makes sense. What does that mean? Well, Andretti, which had Acura, they have a statement that they put out. They're looking forward to announcing our plans for 2025 in the very near future. Do they poach Cadillac from Ganassi? Who knows? And then you have notes on Nashville. They did spray resin. They did do the tire dragon for the Cup race. How does that impact IndyCar? And then also Joseph Newgarden, who was there as like an ambassador or something. He says he'd love to drive a Cup car in the future. Also, this part was interesting. Named oval races at Bristol, Nashville, and the Coca-Cola 600 as part of the double as his top choices. And he also kind of wants to see IndyCar and NASCAR compete on an oval on the same weekend. Good luck. NASCAR will never do it.
Good luck with that. They're never going to do that. Would Roger Penske right now, with Joseph Newgarden winning multiple championships and multiple Indy 500s, give the blessing to race the double? And could he do it for Team Penske in NASCAR?
It's going to need a lot of testing.
I would agree. But thankfully, there's more testing time in Cup than there is in IndyCar.
Michael Andretti looking at starting an NHRA team. That from Auto Week.
He's looking to do NHRA. He's looking to do Cup. He's looking to do Formula One. Which one happens first?
I would say NHRA if he's that interested.
Really?
Yeah.
I almost say NASCAR. We'll see.
And Robert Wickens was able to drive a Formula E car over the weekend when they were in Portland for the E-Prix, the U.S. one of the U.S. stops in that series with hand controls. First time driving an open-wheel car since, of course, his crash at Pocono. So really cool to see him to get that opportunity.
Pretty cool to see. And I know some people will say, well, when is he going to do that for IndyCar? From what we understand, the technology is there for an IndyCar. They just need someone to finance it.
And then tweets of the week, just one tweet. And it's a simple one. Scott McLaughlin.
I knew you were going to go this direction.
Think of the trees. And he posted a gif of like I don't know, it's sort of attachment to an excavator. It's essentially just like shreds trees. It's wild.
Starts at the top and just comes down and just shreds them. So, yeah, still throwing shade at McLaren. We didn't see anything about TK, at least yet, responding.
No.
This time around, at least.
All right. Finally, time for our random split error driver of the week.
All right, we're going to the late 90s of the illustrious kart. I think it was the FedEx Kart World Series then, right? 1999.
Yes.
And we're going with Andrea Montermini, who raced 4 races in 1999 with All-American Racers in the Eagle 997 Toyota. 4 races. His first race was Vancouver. It was his first race in kart in 5 years. He had done 6 starts between 1993 and 1994 for teams like Euro Motorsport, Peyton Coyne Racing, King Racing, and our favorite Project Indy, and did not return then because I think he was doing Formula One.
MTV Simtech Ford.
And he did.
For 94.
It was weird. Well, this is the kind of season he had in 1995 for Pacific Grand Prix. He had, 10 retirements in that season. He only finished 3 races.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he wasn't with good teams.
That's horrible. Like, you talk about bad teams now. They're at least finishing races. I mean, he started 17 Grands Prix that year and only finished 3 of them.
Side note, saying Grands Prix feels like the most stuffy thing you could ever say imaginable, but it's correct.
It is. So anyway, that was his career in Formula One. So kind of bookended his Formula One career with kart, both before and after. But we're talking about the All-American Racer season 1999, finished 11th at Vancouver. Also had starts at Laguna Seca, Houston, and Surfers Paradise when he finished 15th. And that was it. In terms of his highlights, he scored a 4th place at Detroit in 1993 for the underfunded Euro Motorsport team. It drove in 1999 for Dan Gurney's team, his last season of team ownership, of course, with All-American Racers. He also raced in the 24 Hours of Daytona in 2001 and did the FIA GT Championship in Ferrari cars as well. He also did some GTA open class stuff later on with the Scuderia and Ferrari. But that was about it. Did some 24-hour Le Mans in the late 90s. But that was it. Basically, portions of 3 different seasons. We're talking about 1999 All-American Racers. 4 races. Best finish of 11th at Vancouver. Mr. Andrea Montermini, this week's Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
All right. We'll be back next week to recap the Honda Indy 200 at Mid-Ohio, the debut of the hybrids for IndyCar for Justin Kinney. I am Caleb Hatch. This has been New Track Record Podcast.